Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have with me someone everyone knows, Professor Nalapat, who's going to tell us what's happening in the West and how should actually India start dealing with the West. Firstly, sir, namaskar. Thank you so much for joining in and looking forward for your views. Sir, an overall picture, was it a coup? What happened to Joe Biden? How come he just ran away? And is this a shift or is there a drift in the conundrum, as they say? Is there a drift in the in the playing field, if I may, of the US?
Uh, the US is a democracy, and in a democracy, reality is sometimes hidden under layers and layers of all kinds of activity. It's very difficult to follow, for example, the leadership position in a democracy, whereas in China, there's only one leader, there's only one autocrat, and in the US, there are multiple centers of power. You have the legislature, you have business, you've got civil society elements, and you have even within the ruling party different groups. Where Biden is concerned, quite frankly, I think people around Trump, and I think possibly Trump himself, made a mistake in basically saying that we are going to arrest Biden. We are apart from Hunter Biden and his son and other people in the family, we are going to go after Joe Biden himself. I think that was quite an unfortunate remark to make about sitting US president. And I think that kind of alarmed the family of Joe Biden. This is my hypothesis. And they insisted on him staying in the race. The fact is that he should have been a one term president. Some of us have been saying that at the beginning of his term. He could do a lot of good work as a one term president rather than worrying about getting a second term and diluting the kind of work he could be doing. So I think what happened was that kind of spooked the family, and until the last, frankly, for about 6 to 8 months, the Democratic Party was really not very happy about Biden. They wanted a change, but out of politeness, they gave him the nomination, thinking that soon afterwards he will decline it. In the sense, he will say, "I'm stepping back," but he didn't do it. And I'm told the final holdovers were his close family members,
Hmm.
because and possibly it was motivated by worry that apart from something happening to them, something would happen to Joe Biden himself. He's a very nice individual, a very personable individual, a very strong family man, and obviously the family was very concerned about that. So I think they held out for a very long time, much too long a time. In fact, if they had held out beyond the end of this month, beyond July, I can tell you it would have been too late for the Democrats. So they held out until the very last moment. And as a consequence, I think Kamala Harris got the benefit of that. There were no, you know, there were no contests, because the fact is, in a situation where you're just 3 months away from the vote, if you have a contest and your opponents tear you apart, that's going to be remembered 3 months from now. It will be forgotten 4 or 5 months from now, but a lot of people will remember 3 months from now. Oh, Kamala Harris, isn't she the person that X or Y or Z in the Democratic Party said is A, B, C? So I think, frankly, there was no option except Kamala Harris because just 3 months were left. And I don't think she's a bad option for Democrats either. It's already been proved by Barack Obama that a person who's not white can get elected. What has not been proven so far is whether a lady can get elected. And if Kamala Harris gets elected, she will be the first woman president of the United States. There have been women prime ministers across South Asia. There have been women leaders in different parts of the world, including across the Atlantic. I mean, you had so many very, very important, and even today you have many women leaders. US has never had a woman president. So from that point of view, it will be transformational. But just as everybody said in that time, oh, Barack Obama can never become president. He shouldn't even try. In fact, that is the Clinton war machine's main battle cry. A black man can't be president. But he became president. Now the battle cry, is that frankly a woman cannot be president. Though the Republic, And that is also very, very, very false, in my opinion. I think the majority of the US electorate is mature enough to understand that color does not matter, gender does not matter. What matters is competence. As far as Kamala Harris is concerned, I'd like to say the fact is that she was a very competent special prosecutor. She was a very competent senator. You should go back to your old videos of Kamala Harris as prosecutor and Kamala Harris, as a senator, tearing people apart on the witness stand.
Mm.
But as vice president, Biden deliberately put her under a shadow. And that's possibly because his family was wondering whether he should go in for a second term or not. And from the start, they wanted to keep that option open, which I think was a big mistake of theirs. And she was put under a complete shadow. So for the last nearly 4 years, Kamala Harris has been, in a shadow. She has not been able to show her qualities at all, except now, a few days before, when she has become the nominee. So I don't believe she's a bad nominee. I think she's a good nominee. I think she's a winnable nominee. There's no question about that.
So the fight in America today is so polarized. And when we look at the narratives that are coming out, Modi, authoritarian, I think there are three main narratives, four main narratives. Dictator, you won't have elections. So democracy, you won't have elections. Authoritarian dictator, and religious nationalism. These are the four things which, if you look at the copybook play, it's literally same for Trump, literally same for them. Do they expect somewhat, an impact of the similar kind of what they were in most likelihood able to achieve in India, or not achieve in India as well,
Well,
depending on
frankly,
where you look like it?
frankly, they've been discredited. Whether it's news channels, the media, politicians who gave this dystopian view of India as no longer a democracy, they're completely silent now. That they were. I calculated long back and communicated that to a few people that the anyone but Modi faction, people who wanted anyone but Modi as the prime minister, were aiming at a target of the BJP of 220 seats. Well, they were pretty effective and I must say very active. But the reality is that the BJP came very close to that target. It got only 240 seats, which is very close to the target set by the anyone but Modi faction. So that shows Indian democracy is alive and kicking. If it were not, this would not have happened, quite frankly. And even now, you have stories going around of vote rigging and other things. If you have got vote rigging, are you going to vote rig in a way that you are dependent on other parties, or are you going to rig enough votes to get a majority on your own? It defies common sense to say the BJP rigged its vote against itself. So it got, a tally of 140 seats, less than what it was presumably aiming at. So I'd like to say India is a very strongly functioning democracy. I'd like to remind you of Mr. Rahul Gandhi, who's an extremely aggressive and energetic leader of the opposition. When he traveled abroad, he said, "We're no longer a democracy. We have no hope. There's no hope for India. There's no future." Well, soon after he came back, his party fought the Karnataka election, assembly election, and guess who won, Adi? I'd like you to make three guesses as to who won that election. Whether it was a BJP, whose Rahul Gandhi said was rigging everything, or whether
Hmm.
the BJP rigged the election in such a way that it lost and the Congress won. That again sounds
Master
extremely illogical.
masterstroke. So that was a masterstroke by the BJP. That's the whole thing. BJP planned it in such a way that Rahul Gandhi should win, and so that the democracy tag is taken away. I mean, it's
No, no,
just
no.
all sorts of theories that fly around this place. And see, that's the whole thing, sir. When we look at the Indian politic and we look at the American politic, the polarization factor has gone up massively, and that's something that we can see even in France, we can see everywhere, even in England. We've seen that happening in the recent elections. So overall, before we get into bilaterals and stuff like that, how do you see this particular polarization factor going across all over the world? Democracies are kind of facing this challenge.
Well, uh, the root of the problem is rising inequality of incomes. A
Mm.
stable society is where the middle classes expand and the upper class also expands and the lower classes shrink. Now, it's very unhealthy. We have a situation like in the United States, where frankly, the underclass has not shrunk, it has grown. The middle class is under extreme pressure, and the upper class is just absolutely crazily rich. You saw that movie Crazy Rich
Mm.
Asians. I mean, now you're crazy rich Americans. People who can, I mean, in terms of GDP, they could possibly account for more than half the GDP of about 50 countries or 60 countries, any one of them. This is crazy. And the fact is, there has to be a better distribution of income. Now, what happens is because of cable television, because of the internet, people are enabled to see how the top rungs are living and they compare that with their own lives. So everything becomes relative. Now, this government has done pretty well in looking after 800 million people with food, with some amount of health care, housing, etc. But if you're a young man and you've got your smartphone, and about 700 million people in India uh, have now got access to the smartphone. More than that, have got access to the internet. And then you see how the super rich are. Then you say, "My God, what am I? I mean, there's nothing. I'm absolutely, I'm dirt poor relative to super rich."
Hmm.
Actually, he or she is much better off than he or she was about, say, 10 years ago. Much better off. But relative super rich, he or she feels that I'm worse off because now they compare with the present super rich, their present lives. So it's become a big challenge for governments, frankly, to ensure that economic growth goes into double digits so that you can ensure growth, not just trickle down. Growth moves from the
Bottom up.
base, from the bottom up, and then you have an expanding middle class, a shrinking lower class, and an expanding upper class. There's
Upper
nothing wrong
class.
with being upper class, but the fact is, when the upper class is not really, is I mean, it's not really expanding. The middle class is facing pressure under taxation and various other means. And the lower class is basically comparing itself relatively, not even to the middle class, but to the upper class. And it gets more and more dissatisfied with what it sees, and either it abstains from voting or it votes for the opposition party, especially a party that promises government jobs to everybody, that promises so many freebies. Karnataka government promised so many freebies, the Congress party, and they got elected. And now they're finding it impossible to meet the cost of
Yep.
those freebies. Eventually, the taxpayer has got to pay. And if the tax base is taxed beyond a point, well, either they're going to stop paying taxes and they're going to start cheating, or they're just going to leave the work stream and say, what's the point of earning income when 50, 60% of my income goes into the coffers of the government? I need to keep at least 35 or 40% maximum uh, of my income to go to the government through various taxes, state taxes, local taxes, municipal taxes, central taxes. And if anything more than that ratio is there, well, frankly, there's a disincentive then. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, this disincentive also breeds a tendency to avoid the formal economy. Now, GST, in my view, collections can go up much more, very much more, if the rates were less. It's a very odd thing, but you have lower rates and you have greater collections. So you have less rates, and then you have anomalies like somebody who earns 20 lakhs plus 1 rupee a year pays the same percentage of GST as somebody who earns 200 crores per year. Now, that
Hmm.
is a tremendous anomaly, and it's not the fault of the center. We can't just put the blame on the center. The state governments also are reluctant to cut the taxes, but that's the reason why these problems are coming. And in my view, we need to ensure, very, very frankly, that you have a tax structure that incentivizes consumers. that incentivizes savings. Today, if even savings are taxed, where's the incentive for saving? And the more you tax, the higher the effect on inflation. And then the standard of life goes down even more. So it becomes a vicious circle. There has to be a virtuous circle. And I'm happy that in this budget, the finance minister has introduced measures such as decriminalization. I've never believed in criminalizing on a large scale, or basically using the police force rather than persuasion to to induce people to pay taxes and to do other things. You have in America, for example, you have financial measures. You pay a certain amount of money, a certain penalty, but you're not always threatened with jail. In
Hmm.
India, you can be threatened with jail for anything, and these are laws that were made, by the way, by people like P. Chidambaram. Chidambaram is not a BJP man.
Yeah.
He introduced these laws, and as Home Minister, he implemented these laws. And we need to more of these laws to go, more decriminalization to take place, so that people feel it's not that some rogue official can tomorrow pick me up for and use some reason and keep me in jail for a long time. In the internet, for example, in internet space, we have to be very careful that our digital laws are not such that will
Hmm.
permit unrestricted use of police power and jail time. So if we
Correct.
do that, what happens is that you're disincentivizing people. We had that situation in India earlier. You had the RBI coming in with all kinds of regulations on cryptocurrencies. What
Yeah.
happened? They all shifted. And where do they go to? To Dubai. They went to Dubai. And today, Dubai and Abu Dhabi are the crypto capitals of the world. They know crypto is the new oil, it's the new gold, and these are the crypto capitals of the world. Donald Trump has just given a speech a day ago in which he said, if I come, well, I'm going to free crypto from all the restrictions placed on it by Biden. I'm going to make America the crypto capital of the world. India can be the crypto capital of the world. At the same time, use blockchain, use modern technology to make processes transparent so you can catch crooks and terror funders. Don't forget, Adi, terror funding is not just done through cryptocurrency, it's done through gold, it's done
Yep.
through silver, it's done
Yeah.
through cash currency, it's done in a multiplicity of ways, including land transactions, frankly. So I'd only like to say that that is what we need. This budget has made a very good start in that. Another very good start is this internship scheme for the
Hmm.
top companies, because the problem in large parts of our education system, there are some institutions which frankly don't have that problem. Manipal, for example, we have thousands and thousands of foreign students on our in our Manipal campus, but a lot of institutions have that problem. So there needs to be a period of 6 months or 1 year of on-the-job training before a person really gets acclimatized to the job after education. And from that point of view, this is a brilliant idea of Nirmala Sitharaman. Going in for subsidizing internships, it's a brilliant idea, and I think this is an idea that will really take off and which will ensure a lot of investment into India. This is the age of decoupling.
Yep.
It's inevitable. You may say all nice things about China. You may, basically say, oh, China, I'm getting 10 paise more, so I'll import from China. I'm not going to, do anything about an Indian company which is making the same item probably better. But it's inevitable that the democracies decouple from China.
Hmm.
India will be the obvious alternative. Today, Mexico is the alternative for the United States. India is a much better alternative in terms of talent and manpower, because Mexico is already reaching the limits of its manpower. We have
Yeah.
a great opportunity. I think that's what Narendra Modi is pointing out very, very recently, in which he talked about India becoming a magnet for investment,
Talent.
domestic
Talent and
and
investment.
international. I think this finance bill has shown clear steps towards that, and I expect much more in the days to come.
So when we see the, that just tells you that the Indian game is changing, the Indian economy is changing, Indian people are changing. There's a whole lot of energy which is coming into India. A lot of money is coming into India as well. A lot of money is being generated within India. So that means aspirational value is going up within India. Now, with that aspirational value, the governance aspirational value also goes up. The expectations from the government go up. When you look at that, sir, a lot of people today want India to take its rightful place in the world. There are, of course, few people who don't want that to happen. How do you see that particular aspect? Because we have this section in the deep in the State Department within the US, within some sort of a collusive sort of an effort between the Chinese and the State Department as well, where they want to keep India and its, push it down. And we see these narratives keeping on coming across, especially right after the elections. We see this constantly. How do you see this whole game, sir?
Aadi, you're completely right. The Sino-Wahhabi lobby is very embedded in several parts of the United States. Unfortunately, State Department is a particular target of theirs,
Hmm.
but fortunately, the Department of Defense (DoD) is a little better, if I may say
Sure.
so. Which is
Hmm.
why the attitude of the DoD is very different from the attitude of state, which frankly just gives morality lessons, which
Correct.
nobody will take seriously, including Americans themselves, will not take morality lessons from the State Department seriously. Or, so but you're perfectly right that situation is happening. You're perfectly right that people do not want to see a government make progress on the regulatory and other measures, the fiscal measures, the monetary measures that we need for double digit growth.
Hmm.
And may I remind you, in 2014 itself, Prime Minister Modi talked about minimum government, maximum governance. That is absolutely the right thing to have said. Since then, he's been facing, of course, entrenched inertia and resistance. But I think in these 10 years, he has broken through a lot of that. So, this is the time, Modi 3.0, when it's time for that kind of a breakthrough in regulations and restrictions to happen. And this over centralization, you leave some things to state governments. For example, the farm laws would have been made state laws. Leave it to
Hmm.
states, because frankly, the farm laws make a lot of sense, and the present system of payment of a lot of money to a few farmers in a few states makes no sense, because they're producing crops that they need not produce.
Yeah.
Farmers in the Punjab can produce vegetables, they can produce fruit, they can produce so many things which could be way more profitable than the wheat and rice that they're producing now. So a lot of it was wasted until the Prime Minister said, "No, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to give it to people." So 800 million Indians are getting the benefit of that. But the fact is that that is a mismatch of market demand and production. And it's a mismatch caused by state directed policy. So I think, we do need changes in policy, and we have to make them more state focused. So the state wants to develop, let it develop, let it compete with other states, and the center can offer a level playing field,
Hmm.
absolutely a level playing field. Now, what's happening is that the states are basically, competing against the center. That's not healthy. They should compete against themselves. And I hope that will come. In the United States, unfortunately, the same situation we are watching, because as you and I know, we have discussed this some years ago, the Sino Wahhabi lobby is trying to widen the fissures in society, is trying
Yeah.
to squeeze the moderate middle and widen the fringes. And to a large extent, unfortunately, it's been successful. You've seen the voices in India. Oh, we're not a democracy. We are dictatorship. We are this and we are that. And then you see a result with 240 seats, which is not very far to what, frankly, in my assessment, the anyone but Modi forces wanted. It was 220 seats. Not very far from that at all. So India is a healthy democracy. Prime Minister Modi is the Prime Minister, elected Prime Minister. He's been elected. That's why he's the Prime Minister. He's not self appointed. He's not army appointed. He's not party appointed. He's been elected. So
Yes, sir.
I just want to say that that kind of narrative, I hope, will tone down a bit, and everybody will join hands, frankly, in ensuring a better future for India. Because this has to be a collective effort. an effort of
Hmm.
1.4 billion people, and an effort across the political spectrum.
Absolutely. I mean, since the day of the inauguration, we see back-to-back attacks by the Wahhabi Sino lobby as well. Pakistan on one side, which doing what it is in Kashmir and everything, and you also have the Chinese kind of interfering within Khalistan, and there's a whole lot which has come out about that as well. How do you see this neighborhood sort of a game? Because the other, I won't like to call it smaller countries. I hate that word, smaller. I hate that phrase, smaller countries. There's no country smaller than the other or larger than the other. But the neighborhood nations around the place, how do you see them looking at what's happening in India and between India and China?
The Google constrainment of China, Nalapat. And you'll see that the first, I was talking about this in private conversations and lectures. And in 2003, if you Google, a search immediately comes up of an article of mine pointing out that you must constrain China. So otherwise, by banning high technology items, by preventing China from becoming a tech superpower, because if we do so, China is going to become impossible to control as a military superpower. That
Yeah.
is 2003. It is only in about 2017 that that particular prescription was followed. 2017. I've been saying for about 6 to 7 years about
Hmm.
this Sino-Wahhabi effort to widen the fringes, and we have still not seen concerted
Yeah.
efforts in the big democracies about that. Here now, there is now policy in force of some constrainment of China. High technology items are being taken off the link by several countries. India was first off the block almost by talking about removing of certain apps, which are frankly just filtering data to the CCP
Yeah.
through apps that are China controlled. So, from that point of view, this is taking place. And again, from that point of view, we are in an ideal situation to gain from that,
Hmm.
provided we make the right geopolitical moves. You can't be everything to everybody. You've got to take sides in the new Cold War, Cold War 2.0. You can talk to people, but let me be clear with you. China has accepted the reality of Cold War 2.0, 2.2 by basically, and basically right from the last 20 years or so.
Yeah.
It's been
Okay.
preparing for that. And now it started preparing for a possible hot war. So they've been prepared. We can't be caught unawares. Finally, constrainment is coming, but it's still Cold War 2.0. And a lot of people in the US, for example, Biden, he's reacting as though it's still the old Cold War, Cold War 1.0 between Soviet Union and the US. It's not. It's between China and the US and other democracies. So Biden, I think, is something that JD Vance gets very well.
Hmm.
One thing
Hmm.
about JD Vance, he's very clear-eyed about China, and he's also got an Indian wife, who's a Hindu wife. She's from Andhra Pradesh, a very proud daughter of India. And I think from that point of view, JD Vance is a good candidate. Kamala Harris also has got Indian links. I don't buy this conspiracy theory that she's anti-Indian and all that. No, but certainly, inevitably, they'll have to decouple. Inevitably, they'll have to search for alternative destinations. Mexico has been a big beneficiary. Vietnam, a huge beneficiary. Thailand, Indonesia, big beneficiaries. India needs to be the biggest destination because we are the only destination that can compete with China. And for
Yeah.
that, I believe in Modi 3.0. We are going to go in for that overhaul that is needed to attract that so that we get not just tens of billions of dollars as the Chinese got in the 1990s because the Narasimha Rao reforms was sabotaged by his own party. Arjun Singh and
Yeah.
N.D.
Yeah. That.
Tiwari, and there are other names also. Let's be honest. If you search that, it was sabotage. So the result was half completed reforms, and as a consequence, China got tens of billions of dollars of investment in the 1990s, about half of which should have come to India. Today, we can't afford to make that mistake. I mean, but the good news is it's now impossible, frankly, to talk about investing in China and high tech because constrainment has started. Something that I had called for in 2003. If we had called for it in 2003, you would not have seen the threat Taiwan is facing. You would not have seen the takeover of the sea space of the South China Sea and the menacing posture of China all across its neighborhood. You'd not have seen all these military bases. It didn't take place. Now we need much more tougher measures. We
Hmm.
need, in fact, a policy of controlled, you know, activity vis-a-vis China, a policy of containment of China, which is not the same as the policy with the USSR, but which ensures that China does not break out and get into a situation where it feels kinetically it can challenge the US and other democracies. Today, I predicted in the beginning in 2022, Ukraine war, China wants it to go on forever. I predicted in 2023. Guess how Hamas got access to all that Israeli intel that there'd be hardly any security on its side of the border during that day. That there'd be a big party. You'll have people who are thinking of anything else except a terror attack. Where did it get that from? It's no superpower. I'm not going to name that superpower. You know the superpower. And China has made it very plain it's supporting Hamas. It's made it very plain it supports other groups, Hezbollah, for example. It's very clear about that. So China will want the Gaza conflict to keep on continuing. Unfortunately, Netanyahu seems to have fallen into some kind of a trap. And if there's a war between Israel and Lebanon, well, it will be a very difficult situation for the world, which will have severe impact on the globe. uh, but
Hmm.
and as far as the US is concerned, it will have a severe impact in the US and most terribly for the people of Israel themselves. So I do believe that there should be a pullback, that you can't force this Hezbollah to launch a war. So I don't believe Hezbollah would have launched a terror attack on a Shia group inside Israel. One of the hardly any Shia groups. There are some Sunni groups, hardly any Shia groups inside Israel. And
Hmm.
Hezbollah is a Shia organization. It's certainly not going to launch an attack on that. It's a false flag operation. God knows by who. But I think Netanyahu should not fall into the same trap. Ariel Sharon fell into that trap way back, and he went and invaded Lebanon when, frankly, it was a clash between Maronite Christians and Shiites, and he
Yeah.
got into
Yeah.
the side of the Shia, against the Shia and for the Christians. And thereafter, Israel has been a target of Shia terror. Now, if an attack on Hezbollah, attack on Lebanon, which is going to bring in Iran, which is going to bring in other countries, Israel is making itself vulnerable to much more danger in the future. So I do hope that the pullback by Netanyahu before Hezbollah responds in force, and should it do so, I hope the response will be like what it was last time when Israel did something more or less symbolic, and and Hezbollah and the action is also symbolic. This is not a symbolic attack. It is not designed to be. It learned from the previous attack.
Yep.
And the fear is Netanyahu will understand that and then begin an operation in Lebanon that he can't control the end of. And that's going to be a very great disaster for everybody. And it's, of course, going to serve Xi's interest of a forever war in Gaza. And I mean, in that area,
Hmm.
with Israel and you may finish off Gaza. Now the Chinese have arranged a get together of all the factions in Gaza, terror and non-terror. So terror factions can now infiltrate into the West Bank. So Palestinian terror is going to be a fact of life in Israel for a long time, thanks to this unity conference. You can't
Yeah.
unite terrorists and non-terrorists, but the Chinese have done that. And if there is a full-fledged war between Hezbollah and Iran, it will drag in you know uh, uh, big powers into it, and then it will become a forever war. I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
just as Ukraine, for example, Ukraine is trying desperately to bring NATO into the war. Guess
Yes.
who is very keen on that? Guess China. They would like to get NATO completely embroiled in Ukraine against Russia so they can have freedom, should they need to act over Taiwan
Hmm.
or, in the South China Sea or elsewhere. So I think these games are going on. The Chinese have a plan. They have a strategy. The Wahhabis have a plan, but fortunately, Wahhabism is getting weaker. The Muslim community is asserting itself. Moderate voices are becoming more powerful. Even the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and Al Saud, who was the family that was been tied to the Wahhabis from its the beginning of its rule, has broken
Hmm.
away from Wahhabism. So that's a good sign. And today the world is breaking away from China. So these are hopeful signs, but a cataclysm such as a full-scale war between Hezbollah and Israel could lead to us falling over a precipice, and I hope that's
Yeah.
avoided.
Last question, sir. How do you think India should handle it as far as the foreign policy aspect is concerned? There is obviously aggression against India, but we need to kind of balance ourselves. Couple of trips to Europe and Russia, as well as now Austria. Now upcoming Ukraine. There's a lot which is happening there. Jaishankar ji met Wang Yi in ASEAN, good handshake and everything, and then goes back, goes to the ASEAN summit and says UNCLOS needs to be followed, and so that's a whack again on the Chinese, and now going for the Quad meeting. So there's a lot of pragmatism in the foreign policy currently, sir. How would you assess it, and what should India do?
I'd like to say that India has done the right thing under the Prime
Mhm.
Minister and the External Affairs Minister, working under the close contact with and I would say guidance of the Prime Minister. It has kept good relations with Russia. You know, you and I, including on your program, I've long called for downsizing of defense purchases from Russia. You remember I was opposed to S-400, for example.
Mm.
Unfortunately, at that point in time, the Americans didn't offer THAAD as an alternative. That was a strategic error, blunder that they made. But the reality is that we have to downsize our defense purchases. That is happening. We have to upscale our overall trade with Russia. That's also happening. And even if there is a chaos in the Middle East, we'll be lucky in the sense we are getting some links established, like the Vladivostok Chennai Canal, and which can ensure that we get our oil supplies irrespective of some problem in the Middle East, which frankly it cannot be allowed to last for long. And that is where I'm really worried about what's happening in between Israel and Hezbollah right now. And I certainly hope it'll come back from the brink. The good news is more and more people are beginning to realize what at least I used to realize for the last 2.5 decades, and started expressing myself after the Doklam. Till that time, I was, keeping my views private and just writing about it occasionally. But
Mhm.
the reality is, the whole world is now active. The non Chinese dominated part of the world is now active in removing tech from China, and soon other industry will also follow. And I'm
Mm.
hopeful that the same situation will happen regarding Wahhabism. So I think we have a very good card to play. Mr. EAM Jaishankar is playing it very well. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is planning it very well. But it's a very delicate operation to have. As far as the situation in Lebanon is concerned, India has never taken sides between Shia and Sunni, frankly, and I don't think we should. We shouldn't get involved in any internecine conflict within our border or outside our border. And I think that's a wise decision on the part of the Prime Minister not to get involved and to take sides in that. And,
Mm.
and should it come to a situation where there is an escalation, obviously India will protect its sea lanes, which is expected of it. But I don't
Mm.
think that, I mean, I don't think more can be done or more by India. But I'm quite hopeful that this kind of a policy, which is really balancing geopolitical reality with the needs of India, which is now working quite well, continues. That's why I was quite relieved, frankly, that the BJP got 240 seats, 20 more than that 220 of the anyone but Modi crowd. And Narendra Modi came back as the prime minister because you can't change the captain in the middle of a storm.
Mm. Absolutely correct, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for that insightful discussion. Thank you. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and hope to catch up with you once again very soon, sir. Till then, my regards to you and all the very best. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.